And so the second issue that she wants us to draw from Romans chapter 1 is the answer to that question. Mm-hmm. Why doesn't everybody believe? And she says it's rather simple, right? Romans 1:18 says that they suppress the truth. Romans 1:21 says that although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. Romans 1:28 says they did not see fit to acknowledge God. So they're refusing to acknowledge God even though there's evidence for it, right? They are refusing to honor God even though there's evidence for him. Mm-hmm. And the basic idea here is that suppression of truth is what's going on, right? And so her point here is that we all suppress the evidence for God from creation. We all suppress that truth, right? Mm-hmm. She says, God has made everything known to us, and he wants to interact with us, and he has his own views about what our lives should be like. And, of course, we don't want that, right? We don't want God in control of our lives and that sort of thing. And so what we do is we kind of hold down the knowledge that comes out of creation, right, and suppress it because we don't want God in our lives in such a way as that.
Think about like taking a basketball into a pool and trying to keep it under the surface. It always wants to pop back out, and sometimes you can have fun, hitting your brother in the head with something like a basketball in the pool. Not saying I haven't done that, but that you actively have to kind of keep it down, keep it under wraps, keep it under your feet, and then all it takes is one good slip and it pops back to the surface.
So she says today we casually use the pop psychology phrase "you're in denial," right? To mean someone who is refusing to admit a problem or face an unpleasant fact. And so she says that folks that don't acknowledge God are in denial like this, right? Because God has made it evident and plain to everyone.
Yeah,
right?
There are evidences that they won't accept because things like their worldview get in the way, and where do they get their worldview from is definitely a longer conversation as well that we'll get into in the later part of the book here.
Yeah. So we have, she says, but the problem is ignorance, as even our principles, our legal principles suggest that ignorance of the law is no excuse, right? You're still what we might call culpable or blamable for doing something wrong. You ought to know, right? And so the same thing applies here. She says we have what she calls an epistemic duty to acknowledge what we know and conform our lives to it. And by epistemic duty, she's saying that we ought to know, right? Epistemology is the episteme is a Greek word for knowledge, and we have a duty because we ought to know these things because God has made it evident and plain. Mm-hmm. So we can't say, we don't know. We do know. We just suppress the truth, and we can't say, well, as a result of suppressing the truth, then I'm okay. I'm not blameworthy. I am, because we have a duty to know. Right? Ignorance of the truth in this case is no excuse. Right? You're expected to adhere to the truth that God has made known. She says that at the heart of the human condition, we might say, is an epistemological sin, right? A sin with regard to knowledge or knowing, right? The refusal to acknowledge what can be known about God and then to respond appropriately. Right? Romans 1:21 says, although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. So they engage in what we might call, what she calls, willful blindness. They refuse to see, right? And so that's the problem. So we have all of this evidence. All of creation shows evidence for God, right? All of life shows evidence from God. Personhood in us shows evidence from God. But we as sinful creatures refuse to acknowledge the evidence. We suppress the truth that nature attempts to give us, right, with regard to God. Mm-hmm. And so that's part of the problem. That's why everybody isn't a believer, because people suppress the truth,
mm-hmm. Right. So how do they hide then? How do we look at other human beings and say, oh, they're not evidence for a grand designer that I can be of the same substance material as someone halfway around the world, and we had no common ancestors up until year 3, whenever that was. How come I can still interact with that person? How come I can still have a sense of duty to that person? How come there's morality that we both seem to have? Or even looking in our own mirror and not having what we talked about a little bit last time of this nihilistic approach that nothing matters and there's no such thing as right and wrong. It seems like that has to come later, especially with what we read a little bit ago, with as far as kind of this sensus divinitas being imbued into us at an early age.